Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is the recent news. Listen carefully to it and watch how people are reacting to this catch and release. Some people believe that immigrants are still being taken to the bay. Please watch till the end. And remember to subscribe for more updates.
I will end the practice of catch and release.
You heard it there. Donald Trump vowed to end catch and release. But now, in week 3 of his presidency, NBC News is learning that some of the thousands of migrants arrested under Donald Trump's orders have already been released.
Catch and release is the derogatory phrase for the practice of detaining a non-citizen and then allowing them to enter the U.S. while they await their court hearing. Contrary to the anti-immigrant characterization of these non-citizens as invaders, they actually tend to be asylum seekers who have been screened by immigration officials and are released on monitoring devices, usually ankle bracelets or a collar. Realistically, the government has to prioritize how it wants to detain individuals, and this administration has said their top priority right now is detaining individuals with certain criminal convictions and individuals who have final orders of removal and have never left.
Back into the U.S. Joining us now, NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. What's up with that, Julia?
Well, Katie, it's because they had the same amount of space they did in the prior administration. So if they just have about 41,000 beds through ICE detention nationwide, a lot of the people they're arresting aren't actually able to be detained until deportation. And some of them are from countries that won't take them back. And federal court orders prevent ICE from holding them indefinitely. That wasn't part of the caveats next to we're going to end catch and release. Now, at the border, it is very hard for anyone to come through the border, so they're not even being caught, let alone allowed to pass there. But inside the United States, where Donald Trump has put a lot of emphasis and made a big show about how many people they're able to arrest. Of course, there's the ride-alongs. We see the images. They post on X how many people they arrest every day. What we're finding out now is that arrests don't necessarily equal deportations. In fact, most of the people who've been deported so far were arrested and detained under the Biden administration. So these people, many of them have just been released back into their communities on ankle monitors where they're able to be tracked as they go through the immigration process, and then they could potentially be picked up later for deportation if there's space. But it just goes to show, Katie, that just because they're being arrested doesn't mean they're actually being deported. And this is also what happens when the Trump administration casts the net very widely and doesn't just go after serious convicted criminals, but rather just anyone living here undocumented. There are a lot of people who end up being released back onto the streets.
So just recently, a grandmother and her family, including a child, were arrested and detained by ICE and not given the opportunity to even explain their circumstances. And what were their circumstances? They were Puerto Rican, making them U.S. citizens, and yet they were sent to a detention center. And it wasn't until they got to that detention center, spent some time there, and were finally able to speak to an officer, and the grandmother was able to produce birth certificates, which is crazy because who carries birth certificates normally around with us? She was able to prove that she was actually a U.S. citizen and then released. But when she was released, she wasn't released in some grand way or an apology or anything. She was literally taken off, and then she had to make sure that she got her own transportation and pay for her own transportation to leave the detention center and go back home. What a horrendous ordeal. And further proof that this policy that we have currently is not to detain people that have a criminal record, but is xenophobic and racist in nature.
The very first Guantanamo Bay migrant flights are happening today. That means that illegal immigrants that were captured in the United States are now being deported to Cuba, the Guantanamo base there. And this is huge because a lot of lawyers, a lot of people are trying to figure out, is this even legal? Because shipping illegal immigrants from the United States out of the United States borders to a foreign country like Cuba, that is a totally different thing. Immigration law applies to and inside of the United States, and they're trying to figure out, is this legal to send people to another foreign country to be held in detention? So yes, they're sending people to Guantanamo Bay, and then they also struck a deal with El Salvador to send deported migrants to El Salvador to be held in El Salvadorian prisons. And it's not even illegal immigrants alone, it's also what they've said is the worst of the worst U.S. citizens could also be sent there to be held, captive in detention. So it looks like the Trump administration is going to the fullest extent of what they think the law applies to here, and it's going to be interesting, the legal battles that follow, because I'm sure there will be plenty, because this has, really never been done at this scale before. So we'll wait and see exactly what comes out of this, but just know that today, the first flights headed to Guantanamo Bay are happening.